It's a hot spring market in the low country of South Carolina, and we're doing a two-part series on strategy. What are the best practices and approaches for buyers and for sellers? So let's get after it. All right, Chris, so today we're talking about buyer strategy. You know, they say that every real estate transaction, the best real estate transaction is where a buyer gives a little and gets a little, seller gives a little, gets a little. And so it's all about trying to find that win-win situation. Today we want to talk about the best strategies for buyers when they're approaching this very still active marketplace here. And so let's kind of talk about that, Chris. So one of the things that we've practiced a lot with our buyer clients is preparation. You know, getting ready for making an offer. Let's go through some of the kind of components that buyers need to be thinking about from our experience on the front line, especially as we're working with a lot of sellers. How do buyers get prepared to have the best approach when they're dealing with a seller on an offer?
Well, if you're financing your purchase, I think you're going to want to focus on having that meeting with your lender first. You want to find out basically kind of what does the lending environment look like right now? Where do you pre-qualify, so to speak? How quickly can you get documentation saying that, hey, I'm a credible buyer even if I'm financed? And that's a good place to start.
And you know, having that pre-qualification letter in hand, if you're getting a loan, is critical. And getting it through a local lender, I know we say this time and time again, but getting it through a local lender, think about it. Sellers are going to be most comfortable if you've got a financing contingency and you're getting that solved through a local lender, maybe even a lender that they're familiar with, right? So that's really a good way to approach that.
Can I jump in on that local lender thing? One of the things that we have found that works really well when you are dealing with a local lender especially is ask the lender, once you've identified your property, ask the lender to pick up the phone and call the listing agent.
Right.
And that phone call, and we've gotten them from the listing side, we've gotten them a lot, sure. Especially from a few local lenders here in Hilton Head, but that's just reaffirming. If the lender calls the listing agent and says, hey, you're about to get an offer from this buyer prospect or whatever, and we've already talked with them, we've already ran their credit, we've already done this and that, they're strong, they're solid, that's going to be a part of the conversation that the listing agent has with the seller.
Huge feather in the cap and gives the listing agent a good sense of confidence, and also gives them something else to share with their seller. And then the other kind of pre-offer or at the time of offer engagement that I think is really smart with a buyer agent is to call the listing agent and ask, hey, what are the hot buttons? Like, what's important to your seller? Is price the most important? Are terms most important? Do they want to close right now? Do they want to close in a few months? You know, what are the things that are going to be most important to a seller so we can kind of feed into that topic?
That's so smart, because price, a lot of times when you have multiple interest or you have expectations of price always tends to kind of find its way in there and collectively in the same general area. But price is not always the most important thing for a seller. It's always important,
of course.
But gosh, there's other things that we need to be considerate of.
We've seen that a lot. Is that, you know, when prices are all up, which is great. We're in a really strong marketplace, and sort of feel like the values in the Low Country are really coming into their own. So as that perpetuates, you've got a lot of people that have owned property for a while. The prices where they are is delightful. So coming down to that $5,000 or $10,000 variable may not be as critical as, okay, now I'm going to focus on something else. When do they want me to close? When do I have to move out, et cetera? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really important. The last thing on preparation I just want to point out is being ready. You know, there are some segments of the market that have a lot of inventory, some segments that still have very light inventory. So when something comes up on the market that you're going to be interested in, you need to be ready, not just with the pre-qual letter, not just in terms of kind of a sense of being positioned for making an offer, but are you set up so you can get electronic signing? Who's going to sign? How are you going to take title? Who does the agent communicate with? Do you want email, phone, text, etc.? Just kind of having a game plan ahead of time is really important.
That's so smart, because things move so quick, and you know, you're shopping and shopping. You might be shopping for a year.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the property's there and it's there, and you have got to act fast.
Yeah. And so let's move on to the next thing. So we've got preparation, then there's price. Okay. So how do you figure out what are the parameters when it comes to, well, what should we offer on this property? And so let's move that one forward a little bit, Chris.
Well, that's a great question because everybody wants to know, how do I offer on this? Yes, it's listed at X. Do I offer X? Do I have to offer X? Can I offer less? Do I need to offer more to get it? So there's a couple things to discuss and analyze with your agent before you make that decision. Look at things like how long it's been on the market. That's important. Typically, when something first gets listed, the negotiability of the seller is going to be less.
Right.
If something sits on the market for a longer period of time, maybe it's more. But you also have to dig a little deeper. You want to look at the history. Have there been any? Let's just say a property has been on the market for 3 or 4 months.
Sure.
Has there been any price fluctuations in the listing itself? Has the price come down? Is the seller trying to identify where the market is, or is the seller just holding steadfast at where they initially listed it? That's going to give you some sort of idea of the mentality of the seller as well.
Right, what's their messaging to the market? And speaking of messaging, a lot of times I think that folks think price reductions are a sign of weakness, a sign that, oh boy, now we got them, now the seller is vulnerable, et cetera. And what we're typically seeing is that a price reduction is a seller that's trying to determine how do they find the sweet spot in the marketplace. And as they do that, a lot of times they're in the same time thinking in their mind, I'm taking away some negotiability in my price. So just because a property's had a price reduction or maybe a couple price reductions doesn't necessarily mean that that's like, okay, I got them. Now I'm going to come in on a lower offer and really catch this wave. Sometimes the seller has already taken out sort of the negotiability on that price point.
Of course. And then I think use common sense, because if you're out there shopping and you've been shopping for a while, you should know what the comps are. You should know what the competition is.
Yeah.
And I think the competition, that's really important. Are other buyers going to all be focused on this singular property? Or is this a property that's a little bit more a dime a dozen, more inventory, more choices? And the more choices and more inventory that you have that a buyer has to choose from, I think the more leverage the buyer has to maybe push down a little bit or on price.
That's all micro market study,
It is.
right? It's so that we've seen that pixelization. We talk a lot about, but there are different segments in our local market. Some have higher inventory, some have really tight inventory. You got to study that, and as we say, kind of read the mood of the market on that. All right. So the last item in terms of preparation, how to have the best strategy on an offer is terms. Okay.
Yes.
So what does that mean? Terms is sort of okay. We talk about the price that everybody kind of fixates on that, but there's all these other facets of an offer that are important to a seller. When do you want me to close? When do I have to get out of the house? Are there contingencies? In other words, is there something in the offer that the buyer's got to accomplish before they're willing to fully commit to that offer? Is a contingency. So let's talk about sort of what the strategy is around terms.
Well, terms, I think you gotta, if I'm speaking to a buyer, I'm saying, okay, now put your seller hat on. What am I as a seller going to be excited about seeing? And we have actually seen offers come in with very high prices, but there's a lot of hair on the offer itself. They've got to do this, they've got to do that, they don't have their ducks in a row, or they need a lot of time for inspections. These are things that make sellers nervous, because you have to think about it from the mentality of a seller.
Right.
When they invest in your offer, when they say, okay, we're going to honor that offer, what do? They're taking their property off the market, basically. Now, they can get backup offers, but you and I both know that backup offers, that's a rare thing. I mean, most buyers and agents right now, if something's under contract, they kind of leave it alone. They might call the agent and say, hey, we're interested if something happens, but they're not going to pursue it. So as clean an offer as you can do is really important. Time on the contingencies, if you're going to do inspections and things like that, that's very reasonable, and we actually recommend doing things like inspections. But do them as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah, and like go back to the lender. Lenders will categorically say, okay, maybe I can get the loan approved in 30 days. But a lot of times we're encouraging buyers, press your lender. Yes. Can you do it any faster? I really want my offer to shine. I've got to put a financing contingency in. Can you do it in 24 days? That's a whole week almost difference to a seller when you're talking about time off the market and they're worried about losing other buyer opportunities, et cetera.
It does, and it just also communicates confidence in the ability to achieve financing in a relatively short period of time. If you've got a 45 or a 60-day financing window, a seller's going to go, why is it going to take them that long?
Right.
And that's going to slow down the excitement a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're not going to buy into it. It's all about buy-in, right? And then there's some other components like what we call the gift of time. We really saw this come out and emerge and get used actively and significantly throughout the pandemic market is giving a seller the opportunity, if it's a hot button, especially if it's a primary residence, the opportunity to maybe stay in the house a little bit after closing. So they know they've got the closing done. They can take the stress of that move out off of that time component and maybe have a little bit of time. And sometimes it's a win-win. A seller's looking for maybe a place to live for 2 or 3 months, and the buyer's like, "That's great. Let's do a leaseback situation." So, considering those kind of components under terms can be really valuable and important too.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that we've seen offers come in, and they have presented us with the gift of time, and it really does make a difference. And again, that speaks more to when you're trying to purchase a primary residence as opposed to a second home or vacation. A second home or vacation property, pretty much it's just closing date.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So just some tips, so you got preparation, you got price, you got terms. You really need to be thinking about on the buyer strategy side. And as you're getting ready to make that offer, we wish you great luck in doing so.